Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know, we're all about getting to the heart of complex topics, making sure you walk away with the knowledge that really matters. And today, well, we're diving headfirst into the world of marine operations and insurance. Specifically, that crucial role of the Marine Warranty Surveyor.
Exactly right. It's a field that often flies under the radar, but MWS, Marine Warranty Surveying, it's absolutely essential when you're talking about these big maritime projects. These ventures, they come with huge financial implications, and those who are insuring them, those underwriters, they need to be confident that the risks are being managed properly, expertly, and that's where the MWS steps in.
Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here. We've been digging through a ton of material on MWS practices, especially when it comes to these demanding jackup operations. We've even got some insights into writing those marine surveying reports.
Yeah.
But really what we want to focus on today, what we think is most valuable for you guys, is understanding that path to becoming a qualified marine warranty surveyor. What does that journey actually look like?
You know, it's a profession that really calls for a unique blend of skills and experience. You need that deep technical knowledge, you got to have the hands-on experience, and a really sharp ability to assess and manage risk. And to really grasp the MWS role, it helps to start with the basics of marine insurance.
Right, back to fundamentals.
Yeah, exactly. And as our research shows, marine insurance, it's essentially a contract, right? It's there to protect financially against potential losses that are just part and parcel of maritime activities. Think shipbuilding, repairs, all of that. It's all about mitigating those, what they call perils of the sea, you know?
Yeah, from the dramatic stuff like storms and collisions, but also those everyday operational risks too. So in this whole insurance world, the certificate of approval, the COA, that really stands out as a key document in the MWS process. What makes it so important?
The COA, you can think of it as the linchpin, really. It's that formal confirmation from the warranty surveyor. And it says, hey, all those recommendations we made before you started this operation, they've been taken care of. These recommendations, they're like essential preconditions, and they're designed to protect the underwriter.
The underwriter being the insurer, right?
Right. Protect them from that potential financial exposure. And without a valid COA, most of the time, that insured activity, it can't go ahead. The insurance coverage would be at risk.
So what kind of recommendations are we talking about here? What needs to be checked off before a surveyor will issue that COA?
Oh, it can be a whole range of things. Our sources point to things like the structure of the vessel, the equipment, making sure certifications are up to date, that they're using the right procedures, even the results of engineering studies. What's required really depends on the specific operation and the risks involved. Like if you're moving a jackup drilling rig, that's going to trigger a whole bunch of checks and requirements.
And the surveyor, they have some real authority in this process, right? They can actually say, nope, not happening. If things aren't up to scratch, or if they think the risk is just too high for the underwriter, that's a pretty big responsibility.
Absolutely. They're like the gatekeepers, making sure everything is safe and ready to go before these big, expensive, and often risky operations get started. To really see how this works in practice, let's take a closer look at, let's say, moving a jackup drilling rig. Shifting it from one offshore location to another. That's a classic example where an MWS is going to be super involved.
Okay, a jackup move.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, what are some of those key things an MWS would be looking at, the things that could lead to recommendations or even a no-go on that COA?
Well, first off, the structural integrity of the jackup. That's paramount. We're talking a super thorough check of all the structural welding. And our sources, they mention industry standards like the structural welding code steel and the construction specification for fixed offshore structures in the North Sea, or similar international codes, of course. The MWS, they're going to want to see proof of non-destructive testing, NDT, that's been done according to those standards.
NDT, so not just a quick glance, right?
Oh, definitely not. We're talking specific requirements here, usually 100% visual inspection, that's a given. For those penetration welds, you're often looking at something like 40% ultrasonic testing, that's UT, and 20% magnetic particle inspection, MPI. Fillet welds, about 20% MPI. But importantly, all those welds on the deck structure, they might need 100% MPI and then another 40% UT on top of that for penetration welds. And remember, the specific project, it might call for even more NDT, especially if there are any doubts about the welding.
Wow, that's a lot of scrutiny on the welding alone. What other aspects would the MWS be zeroing in on during a jackup move?
Well, the towing arrangements, that's another big one. If they're towing the jackup, that MWS, they're going to be all over those main and spare tow wires, checking they meet the minimum braking load, the MBL, and that's often based on the tugboat's bollard pull. They'll also check the towing shackles, making sure there are enough, and all the parts for the towing bridle are there and in good condition.
Sounds like they're making sure there's no weak link in that chain, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about a tow wire logbook.
Is that right? Absolutely. A complete logbook is a must-have. It needs to record everything about those tow wires, every operation, every bit of maintenance, every inspection. That way the surveyor can look at it and say, okay, this wire, it's in good shape, it can handle this tow. And it's not just about the physical towing stuff. The MWS also needs to look at how stable the jackup is, where its center of gravity is. That can change depending on how they're transporting it.
Right, makes sense. Whether it's dry on a heavy lift vessel or floating on its own. What about all the equipment that's actually on board the jackup? Does that get checked too?
Yeah, definitely another important part. If you're towing it across the ocean, things like drill pipe, drill collars, all those tubulars, they need to be stored correctly, secured properly. Crane booms, they got to be locked down tight. Even making sure all the spaces inside the jackup can be pumped out, that's important to keep it watertight during the journey.
So it's a full top-to-bottom check, right? Not just what's fixed to the jackup, but also any loose equipment or lifting gear.
Exactly. Slings, spreaders, lifting beams, all of it has to be inspected, needs to have the right certificates. Usually they follow guidelines from IMCA, the International Marine Contractors Association, the MWS. They'll be checking those markings, the safe working load, the dimensions, what it's made of, and of course the certification. If there are any custom-made lifting frames and they haven't been tested, the surveyor will want to see the specs and the calculations.
Wow, this really highlights how thorough and detailed this all is. It's not just a quick sign-off. It's a complete risk assessment at every single stage. And I know offshore operations, they're rarely simple. Often there are multiple things happening at once. How does an MWS deal with that?
That's where those concepts of SIMOPS and HAZOPIAS come in. SIMOPS, that's simultaneous operations. The MWS needs to understand how those different activities could interact. Any potential conflicts that could lead to safety incidents, damage, environmental problems, financial losses, all of that. HAZOPIAS, that's Hazard and Operability Studies. Basically, they systematically look for hazards and potential problems. The MWS will want to see that those studies have been done and that the risks are being managed.
And that attention to detail, it even extends to the design of lifting points, doesn't it? I remember something about pad eyes and trunnions.
Absolutely. For any heavy lifting, how those lifting points are designed, whether they're pad eyes, padiers, or trunnions, it's a huge safety factor. The MWS, they'll expect to see those stress analysis reports. That includes modeling how the load will be applied, the geometry of the lifting point. They need to be sure it can handle the weight, that the sling angles are right, no risk of structural failure. Keeper plates, too, those are important. They prevent the slings from slipping off.
So it's all about being proactive, finding those potential points of failure before they happen. And clearances, I imagine that's a big deal too, especially in those crowded offshore environments.
You bet. Clearances are critical. The MWS will look at the water depth, where any subsea equipment is, the seabed conditions, the weather, even how well the tugboats can maneuver. They need to make sure things like mooring lines won't snag on anything, or worse, run over something important on the seabed, like pipelines or wellheads. Our sources even suggest at least 10 meters of clearance between mooring lines and anything fixed, except for the specific equipment they're working on.
So you've painted a really clear picture here of what an MWS does, using that jackup move as an example. It's pretty obvious that to do this job well, you need a lot of knowledge and practical experience. Which brings us back to that key question for our listeners. If someone's thinking, hey, this sounds like a really interesting and important job, how do I actually become a marine warranty surveyor?
Well, from all the research we've done, it's clear that it takes more than just reading a few books. You need a deep understanding of how marine operations work, how to assess risk, the ins and outs of marine insurance. And that's where a good training program comes in, something that can bridge that gap between theory and practice.
And this is where we want to highlight a specific resource, one that really stands out in our research as the go-to guide for anyone wanting to become an MWS. That's rigmovemasterclass.com.
Yeah, rigmovemasterclass.com. It's run by course director Captain John, and it looks like exactly the kind of in-depth, hands-on program that someone serious about this career needs to consider. It goes way beyond just theory, giving you those practical skills and real-world insights you need to actually do this job.
From what we've seen of the curriculum, rigmovemasterclass.com, with Captain John at the helm, it covers all the bases we've been talking about, those jackup moves, lifting operations, towing, mooring, the whole works, and they go into a level of detail that we just can't get to here.
Right, and what really makes rigmovemasterclass.com stand out with Captain John's expertise is that focus on industry guidelines and international standards. Organizations like IMCA, BWEA, ABS, API, DNV, they set the standards for safety and best practices in the marine industry. rigmovemasterclass.com, they'll teach you how to use those standards.
And our research even pointed to specific parts of those guidelines, appendices and chapters, that rigmovemasterclass.com seems to cover in depth. Stuff like jack-up suitability assessments, the data you need for site assessments, the nitty-gritty of towing and mooring. They really seem to take a thorough approach.
They do. And having Captain John leading rigmovemasterclass.com, that's invaluable. He brings all that real-world experience to the table, things you just won't find in textbooks. He can share insights from years of working in these complex operations, tips and tricks, things to watch out for. That kind of guidance from someone like Captain John, it's a huge advantage.
So beyond the technical stuff, there's also the communication side, right? Being able to explain your findings and recommendations clearly.
Yeah.
That's where report writing comes in, which is super important for a marine warranty surveyor.
Couldn't agree more. It doesn't matter how much you know if you can't communicate it effectively. Those reports, they're official documents. They can have a big impact, financially and operationally. So being accurate, writing clearly, knowing the difference between facts and opinions, and meeting the client's requirements, those are all crucial skills. And it looks like rigmovemasterclass.com, with Captain John's guidance, really emphasizes that.
And there's also that legal side to consider, right? Our research on report writing stressed the importance of disclaimers and being clear about liability.
Right, a good MWS report, it will have those disclaimers. Who the report is for, the surveyor's liability, what methods and equipment they used, all of that. It's also important to describe the vessels and equipment in detail, including any identifying marks. And again, a program like rigmovemasterclass.com, with Captain John's experience, I'm sure they cover all of that. How to write those clear, concise, legally sound reports.
It really sounds like Captain John, through rigmovemasterclass.com, they prepare aspiring surveyors for everything, the technical side, the communication, the whole package. And it's worth noting, an MWS doesn't just do one type of survey, right?
Yeah.
They could be involved in all sorts of projects.
Yeah, that's true. They could be doing towage surveys, heavy lift surveys, barge loading and unloading surveys, all kinds of things. And a good program like rigmovemasterclass.com, with Captain John's guidance, would likely cover all of those variations.
So putting it all together, becoming a marine warranty surveyor, it's a challenging path, but it's also really important and rewarding. It's a complex world out there, and you need a deep understanding of marine operations, engineering, risk assessment, insurance, all of it.
And from what we've seen, the best way to gain that knowledge and those practical skills is through a program like rigmovemasterclass.com, led by Captain John. It's a real investment in your future, getting that specialized expertise that's so valuable in this industry. It's all about ensuring the safety and insurability of these huge marine projects.
Absolutely. Deciding to gain that specialist knowledge, it's a smart move for anyone who wants to make a difference in the maritime world. So for our listeners, as you're thinking about all this, consider what really grabs your interest in this field. And then think about how the kind of knowledge you could gain from rigmovemasterclass.com with Captain John's guidance could set you up as an expert ready to dive into this challenging and rewarding profession.